In 2022, over 817,000 people left California. At the same time, New York experienced a net loss of around 75,000 families. Houses on the northeast and west coast of the United States were once the most sought-after residences in the nation. Now, people are leaving these areas in droves to live a less expensive and more fulfilling life. Where are people going? Why are they leaving? And could this signal a fundamental shift in the way the United States looks and operates? Over the years, large cities in the United States have both grown and shrunk in size depending on the current state of affairs in the country. However, the mass exodus in several metropolitan areas is becoming a major concern for several states. Where there were once lucrative opportunities and an abundance of workers, there's now a scramble to secure talent and a mad dash to keep people from moving away. Out of the 88 U.S. cities with populations over 250,000, 77 showed signs of a slowdown in growth rate or decline in population over the last several years. This means that 87.5% of U.S. cities could see a severe reduction in their populations within the next decade or two. This wasn't always the case, so what events caused this trend to begin? Early in the 2000s, city populations had gone into decline due to how easy it was for home buyers to obtain credit, creating a boom in the suburban housing market. However, this exodus out of cities was caused by an illusion. Banks were giving out loans with incredibly high interest rates to people who were at risk of not being able to make their payments in full. This all came to a head in 2008 when the housing market collapsed, causing banks to lose more than $1 trillion from bad loans and toxic assets. Between January of 2007 and September of 2009, people were kicked out of their homes as banks foreclosed on their properties. They were forced into apartments or alternate living situations until they could once again make ends meet. As the United States recovered from the Great Recession, cities grew. The suburbs were no longer seen as an option for many as regulators came down hard on banks for giving out bad loans. And homeownership was and continues to be an expensive proposition. Many millennials decided to remain in cities as they pushed their plans to start a family to later in life and instead focused on their careers. But in 2012, things started to change once again. Cities saw an overall decline in growth rate, culminating in 2021 and 2022, when U.S. cities saw a population decline of 0.95%. This was the first time in history that the overall city population in the United States had declined. Right off the bat, it's clear that 3 different states could be in big trouble. California and New York saw the largest number of moves out of their states in 2022. In fact, California lost 343,000 residents last year alone. Now, this is just a drop in the bucket, as California still has a population of around 39.2 million people living within its borders. But this trend is part of a much larger problem, as New York lost 300,000 of its 19.8 million residents in 2022. The trend of residents moving out of certain parts of the country has been occurring for a few years now. One very obvious reason for this is that people began moving out of cities and more densely populated areas in 2020, when the COVID-19 pandemic began. The problem is many didn't come back, and even after the pandemic ended in the United States, many families decided they didn't want to live in cities anymore. Instead, more and more individuals continued migrating away from urban centers to other parts of the country. So, what states are losing population and which are gaining? Let's now examine 10 states that have experienced the largest loss of residents before diving deeper into the data to uncover why this phenomenon is happening in certain regions of the US and not others. In 2021, California had a net loss of over 101,000 households. One of the major reasons why people move is for better job opportunities, but that's not what's happening in this state. California has a GDP of around $3.6 trillion, making up about 14.3% of the total U.S. economy. There's no lack of job opportunities, and it's hard to argue with the climate in many of the state's most populated regions. However, when we zoom in, the data suggests that the Golden State could be in for troubling times. In 2022, around 40,000 people moved out of San Francisco, and it's not surprising. Depending on the metrics used for the cost of living, San Francisco falls somewhere in the top 3 most expensive cities to live in the United States. This is because lucrative tech companies monopolize most of the real estate and businesses. The city is home to or close to numerous tech headquarters, and talented coders, engineers, and entrepreneurs call this place home. Unfortunately, what this means for the rest of the population is that prices have skyrocketed, and now it's all but impossible to afford property in the area. In fact, the median cost of buying a house in San Francisco is $1.4 million, which is just not attainable for most people. It's these crazy prices that have caused many San Francisco residents to leave the city for more space at less cost. Los Angeles has a similar problem. It's estimated that Los Angeles residents spend around an hour in traffic every day. That's not time spent commuting, it's just time stuck in traffic. On top of the hours spent in the car, the city itself is incredibly expensive. The average price for an apartment is $3,093 a month, and that isn't even to own the place you're living in. People renting in LA will never get a return on the money spent on rent, which is true everywhere else in the world. And things are just getting worse as rents increased by an average of $443 in 2022, which has priced many people out of the city they've called home for years. As mentioned at the beginning of this video, the state of New York suffered a net loss of over 75,000 families in 2022. Most of this population decline was in New York City and the surrounding areas. The reason for this has to do with people's ability to work remotely during the pandemic and the desire to be closer to family. That being said, there is one reason above all others that is forcing families to leave the Big Apple and move to more affordable parts of the country. New York City is the most expensive city in the country to live in. This is why more than 20,000 residents left the metropolis last year alone. Now, many companies are struggling to find experienced talent willing to come back to the office to work. However, even lucrative work opportunities don't seem to be enticing people to move to the city or to the surrounding areas. The cost of living is unsustainable, resulting in over 100,000 apartments being left empty, even though the Department of Homeless Services has 67,880 children and adults living in their facilities in 2022. Unfortunately, many people don't have the option of moving out of the city for various reasons, but if everyone was given the opportunity, it's very probable that New York City would lose a lot more than just 20,000 residents. Metropolitan areas of Illinois, such as Chicago, are struggling to keep residents within their borders. Indiana saw a net decline of around 29,000 families in 2021, and data from 2022 suggests that this trend has continued. When a sample of movers was polled on the major reasons why they were leaving the state, around 50% cited taxes as the primary factor causing them to move. Even though the cost of living in Illinois isn't quite as high as California and New York, financial factors have been driving the exodus of people out of state. Pennsylvania's population declined by more than 18,000 households, which can be directly connected to job losses during the pandemic. The interesting thing is that it doesn't appear Pennsylvanians are flocking to New York or other major metropolitan hubs where jobs are more plentiful due to the fact that these regions are experiencing population decline. Like in most parts of the country where states are losing residents, it appears that people from Pennsylvania are looking towards some key states to their south to restart their lives and careers. Massachusetts has the largest population of any state in New England. In fact, Boston and Worcester are the two largest cities in New England, with respective populations of 650,700 and 205,320 people. However, this might also be a contributing factor as to why the state lost 15,489 households last year. In total, this equates to around 57,000 residents moving out of Massachusetts in 2022 alone. What the data shows is that the most populous state in New England is losing more residents than it's gaining. Again, when we conduct our analysis, we'll examine why this is happening. But what's important to know is that when you include New York's economy, which makes up over 8% of the United States' overall GDP, and Massachusetts' economy, which comprises almost 3% of the national GDP, the loss of such large numbers of workers could be detrimental to the United States economy in the future. Washington State is interesting as the reason for people moving out of the state is clear. The 13,000 families that left Washington last year didn't go very far. Instead, the majority went to the neighboring states of Oregon and Idaho, where the cost of living is significantly lower. It's been determined that it's around 7% cheaper to live in Oregon than in Washington, and Idaho is one of the lowest cost states to live in the western part of the country. Many Washington residents decided to move when given the option of living in a cheaper state while working remotely. And now those same people are refusing to move back to Washington even if it could cost them their jobs. These states followed a similar pattern to the ones previously mentioned. Residents moved away from larger urban areas and took up residence in states where the cost of living was lower than where they came from. Approximately 12,145 families left Colorado in 2022. Just under 12,000 families moved out of Indiana. Michigan's population declined by about 11,000 households, and Wisconsin lost about 10,000 families. Washington, D.C. is its own city and federal district. However, even the capital of the United States has been losing residents. In a city that should have numerous government programs and opportunities, people are finding it harder and harder to make ends meet. This has led to 15,000 people moving out of D.C. in 2022 alone. In fact, even the states surrounding D.C. saw a population loss. Virginia lost 24,000 residents, and Maryland's population decreased by 4,500 people. Many commuters to D.C. come from these two states, which is worrying for the future of the nation's capital. What's most unsettling about the data thus far is that many of these states contain one or more of the nation's largest cities. There's clearly a correlation between states with big cities and a decline in population over the last few years. In fact, 8 out of the 10 largest cities in the US lost residents in recent years, with Phoenix, Arizona, and San Antonio, Texas being the 2 exceptions. New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Houston, Philadelphia, San Diego, Dallas, and San Jose all saw a decline in their populations. What's happening in these big cities is becoming the norm instead of the exception in terms of population loss. In general, larger cities are seeing either a drastic decline in incoming residents or are now experiencing a loss. There's nothing pleasing about living in a city with numerous rundown buildings decaying from neglect as people move out en masse. Unfortunately, this could be the future for many major metropolitan areas in the United States. That being said, this could be a short-term trend, and city growth might continue in the future. However, this doesn't seem to be the most likely scenario for reasons we're about to discuss. Let's take a look at where all of these people are moving to. There's no single location where the majority of people are moving to as they flee the states previously mentioned. We know that the Northeast and West Coast are being hit hard, but the middle of the country is also seeing a population decline in major cities like Chicago. Even so, all of the people moving out of cities need to go somewhere. So, where are they going to? The simple answer is that people are moving south. The more complicated answer is that people are moving to key locations offering cheaper houses, jobs, and reasonable taxes. So let's take a look at where the mass migration of people from cities are ending up. The states with the largest amount of new residents are in the southeastern United States and Texas. Number 1 is Florida, where 319,000 new residents moved in 2022. Texas saw an influx of 230,000 residents. Both North and South Carolina also saw a large number of new residents enter their borders, as well as Georgia. North Carolina gained almost 100,000 new residents, while South Carolina saw an increase of 84,000 people. Remember, this is during the same time period that New York and California are losing hundreds of thousands of residents each. When we zoom in on the states that are seeing an influx of new residents, we can pinpoint the exact counties that people are moving to. Unsurprisingly, Americans aren't leaving cities to move to new cities. They're settling down in areas with more undeveloped land and relatively cheap properties. To be fair, people aren't building their own houses or even moving into single-family homes. A lot of the new residents in these states are buying or renting condos and apartments, but things are very different in this part of the country than in the major urban centers where people are leaving. For example, Ocala, Florida saw a 57.1% inbound move rate. This area is about halfway between Orlando and Gainesville, 2 major cities in Florida. However, most people moving to this county are staying away from the cities for the most part. They may work in one of the major urban centers, but that's not where they purchased or rented their homes. This is a trend in other places that saw major increases in residents as well. Tallahassee, Florida had an inbound rate of 56.6%, even though it's the capital of Florida. However, upon closer inspection, the regions being moved to are not in the city itself, but in more rural areas. In fact, the city of Tallahassee saw a decrease in inbound movers. Then there are the Charlotte, Gastonia, and Concord regions of North and South Carolina, which had a 56.6% inbound mover rate. Again, there are pockets where the population declined in these areas, but this only happened near heavily populated urban centers. People from across the country and within the counties themselves are looking to move further away from cities where housing is cheaper. There are major cities in Texas like Dallas that are seeing declines in residents, but Texas is a huge state with a ton of land. The allure is that much of this land is cheap, but the downside is that everyone needs a car if they aren't living within the metro area. This has led to mega highways being built and traffic jams that extend for miles. However, the benefits of living in more rural Texas seem to outweigh the costs, as huge numbers of people are moving to the state to get away from city life. So we know people are moving, but let's dig deeper into the reasons why. It actually comes as no surprise that people are leaving states like California and New York for the South when you look at housing statistics. In general, anyone living in New York typically saves huge amounts of money by moving to another state. It's estimated that housing costs are around 15 times lower in most states compared to New York. This could translate into saving $18,300 a year just by moving. And here is where we get into the crux of why people in the US are fleeing states with large cities. When surveyed, around half of the people who moved in 2021 stated that high housing costs led them to leave cities and expensive neighborhoods. This resulted in searches for cheaper housing and larger living spaces, all of which are more attainable in states like the Carolinas, Florida, and Texas. However, these statistics can be broken down even further. There are actually 3 reasons why US citizens are leaving certain states for others. According to moving statistics in 2021, the majority of movers cited work-related reasons for moving. However, when we dive into the data, it seems that other factors combined with jobs are driving the exodus out of certain US states. Between 2019 and 2021, work-related moves declined by nearly 19%, which indicates that although jobs are a main factor as to why people are moving, it's becoming less prevalent than it once was. We know that families are moving from cities with numerous job opportunities to regions with relatively fewer jobs. This may seem counterintuitive, but these statistics can be deceiving, as it's not just workers who are moving south, but companies as well. The Sun Belt is quickly becoming one of the most thriving job markets in the country. The states we've identified as being where people are moving to were some of the first regions to recover after the pandemic, and it's estimated that there are around 5% more jobs in places like the Carolinas, Florida, and Texas than before the pandemic started. The job markets in the southern regions that people have moved to recently recovered about twice as fast as the rest of the country. Job opportunities and better work-life balance have definitely contributed to these states being a refuge for people escaping from the cities. But there is another perk that people moving to southern counties with booming economies get to enjoy. In Florida, there is no individual state income tax, which means residents of the state only need to pay federal income tax. This is a big plus for people who either live paycheck to paycheck or are trying to save for the future. There are definitely funding problems for social programs that come with this model of low taxes in the Sunshine State, but if the main goal is to move someplace with a strong job market and low taxes, Florida checks both of those boxes. That being said, Texas takes it a step further. In Texas, there is no individual income tax or corporate income tax, so the state welcomes both workers and companies. South and North Carolina have relatively low income taxes too, which is also a huge draw to the area. One thing becomes clear when looking at the trends between which states people are leaving and which states are seeing an increase in residents. The majority of people are migrating from states with high taxes to states with zero or minimal income tax. When you think about it, this all makes sense, and you might be wondering why it took until now for people to make such a move. Most analysts suspect it has a lot to do with the pandemic and how it shifted what was important to people. City life was fun until it wasn't, and once people started realizing that there were opportunities outside of the uber-expensive urban centers in the United States, they took advantage of it. Remote work also likely played a role in people reassessing what they wanted in the place where they lived. Being able to afford a house or condo that was large enough to give families space at an affordable rate started to become more desirable than a cramped apartment in the hip neighborhood of a bustling city. In spite of this, though, you'll soon see that financial reasons are not the only reason people wanted to move. More and more people moving out of major cities and the states that house them are doing so not for job opportunities, but for personal reasons. In fact, many households that are leaving urban areas and heading to other states have admitted to taking a sizable pay cut. This just shows that job opportunities are not the only thing driving the migration of US residents out of cities, and that something else is going on. Recent surveys showed that moving to be closer to family is now just 0.7% behind work-related movers. Moving to be closer to family has actually increased by almost 13% since 2015, at which point it was a massive 41% behind work-related moves. The gap between the two has now closed to less than 1%, indicating that it's not just populations shifting in the United States, but the reasons for why they're moving are changing as well. Now, for the moment you've been waiting for. What is the biggest reason why people are leaving cities and certain states? Like many things, it all comes down to money. Unless you make a ton of money, living in a city can be hard. Housing is expensive, food is expensive, taxes are expensive. There are just a lot of different everyday things that suck the money right out of your bank account. Let's look at several major cities and see what a $100,000 salary feels like in each. You might be thinking, doesn't a $100,000 salary get you $100,000 a year? Not necessarily. Making six figures in New York City is like making minimum wage in many other parts of the United States. Analysts and financial advisors have calculated that a $100,000 salary in New York City feels like making $35,000 in other parts of the US. There are a couple of reasons for this. The first is that if you live in New York City, you are paying federal taxes, New York state taxes, and New York City taxes. So your $100,000 is being taxed by 3 different government entities. Then there's the expensive cost of living, but it's $3,500 a month apartments, which make things really expensive. For this amount of rent, you are likely getting a studio about the size of a broom closet. If we break this down further, the federal, state, and city government keeps around 25% of a New Yorker's paycheck, meaning your $100,000 salary is immediately cut to $75,000. Then you spend $42,000 a year on rent, so the $75,000 becomes $33,000. Inflated grocery prices mean you likely spend around $150 a week just to keep yourself alive. So you can see how quickly $100,000 disappears. Therefore, it's unsurprising that many people are fleeing New York City and its expensive cost of living for a cheaper part of the country. In Washington, D.C. and Los Angeles, California, $100,000 ends up feeling more like $45,000 due to the high cost of housing, groceries, utilities, transportation, and other goods and services. But when we look at cities in Texas, things start to become a little better, which is one of the reasons why people are moving to the state. In Houston and San Antonio, $100,000 ends up feeling close to $80,000 a year. However, other than the unsustainable nature of living in US cities, what is terrifying about these numbers is that the people who are moving out can afford to do so. People who are struggling to make ends meet don't have the ability to pack up and move their whole lives to a new state, which means they're stuck in a city that is quickly eating away at their savings and weekly paychecks. Since large cities such as New York and LA rely heavily on their tax base to fund social programs, things are going to get even harder for people as wealthy and middle-class residents leave these areas. As these populations move out, their money goes with them, which is a serious cause for concern as already underfunded infrastructure and welfare programs will become even harder to obtain for those who need them most. However, it's also interesting to note that the cities are not the only areas seeing an increase in people moving out. Suburbs that surround these major urban hubs are also starting to suffer. In the past, when movement into cities decreased, there seemed to be an increase in the suburbs surrounding those cities. However, nowadays people aren't leaving New York City and moving to commuter towns. They're leaving the region entirely. The same can be said about LA, Chicago, San Francisco, and many other major cities that are losing both their urban and suburban residents. Recent data suggests that although the suburbs aren't losing new residents at the same rate as cities, there has also been a steady decrease in people moving to suburbs that are directly outside of metropolitan areas. A lot of this has to do with the cost of living in many urban suburbs becoming almost as unsustainable as the cities themselves. However, all of the reasons that people are moving from major cities to smaller communities in places like Florida, Texas, and the Carolinas also apply to the people in major urban suburbs who are moving to get to these places as well. There are just more affordable homes and better incentives in the southern states. It's the desire to live someplace where your bank account isn't being squeezed into oblivion by heavy taxes and super high home prices that's drawing people south. And for many Americans, this is much more important than living near a major city or a part of the country they grew up in. Obviously, this isn't true for everyone, and there are definitely people from the South moving to big cities in the Northeast and West, but not to the same extent that residents of cities and their surrounding suburbs are moving out. The suburbs are definitely not losing residents as quickly as their nearby city centers. However, between 2019 and 2021, 43 out of the 56 major metro area suburbs either saw a dip in growth or an increase in the number of residents they were losing. This means that 77% of suburbs around major cities may see serious migrations out of the area in the coming years. The number of major metro suburban areas that experienced population loss has more than tripled over the past decade. So even suburbs that are only experiencing a decline in population growth could soon find themselves scrambling to come up with ways to bring more residents in. Because, let's be honest, a deserted suburb with boarded-up windows and run-down properties will likely not be the first place people will want to move to. It's worth noting again that the mass exodus out of cities into less populated regions in the South might just be an anomaly. However, what appears to be a constant over the past 2 decades is that the number of people moving into major cities is on the decline. So much has changed with advances in technology, allowing some employees to work from anywhere in the world. Then there's the fact that corporations themselves have even begun moving out of cities to more corporate-friendly areas that have lower tax rates or, at the very least, have offered tax breaks for businesses. The never-ending increase in the cost of living in cities like New York, DC, Chicago, San Francisco, and Los Angeles just isn't sustainable for many. Millennials and the generations that follow, who have been putting off having a family, are now looking to start one. Taking care of yourself in a major city is a nearly impossible financial task, but raising a child on a modest or even somewhat high salary is all but hopeless, depending on where you live. This is another factor that heavily impacts the money conversation, drawing people out of city life and causing them to move to states and areas where they can actually afford a property that will allow their family to grow. It begs the question, though, is this a uniquely American experience, or do we see similar trends around the world? Interestingly, what we're seeing in the United States is not the norm for other parts of the world. Around 55% of the world's population is estimated to live in or around urban centers. This statistic is expected to increase to about 68% by the year 2050. This means that in many countries across the planet, more and more people will be moving to cities, which could result in an additional 2.5 billion people living in urban areas in the next 3 decades. To be clear, 90% of this increase will be seen in Asian and African cities, according to the United Nations. The UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs predicts that the growth of urban populations will actually be concentrated in only a few countries. India, China, and Nigeria will make up 35% of the projected urban growth between 2018 and 2050. It's projected that India alone will add 416 million urban residents by 2050. China will see an increase of 255 million city inhabitants, and Nigerian cities will grow by 189 million people. However, it's important to note that other cities outside of the United States have seen a decline in population as well, but for different reasons. Many of the urban centers that are currently experiencing population decline are directly linked to an overall decline in the country's population. Nations experiencing low fertility rates in Asia and Europe, where overall populations are either stagnating or already declining, have seen their urban populations shrinking. For example, Nagasaki in Japan and Busan in South Korea have had shrinking populations since the year 2000. Countries and their urban centers in Eastern Europe, such as Poland, Romania, and Ukraine, have also witnessed their populations decrease since 2000 as well. The United States population is still growing, but not at a sustainable rate. In 1961, the population growth rate of the US was around 1.7%. By 1974, the growth rate fell to around 1%. However, this was still sustainable, as there was another hike in growth rate on the horizon. In 1992, the population growth rate was back up to 1.4%. Since then, the growth rate has declined steadily until 2019, when it sat at around 0.5%. Then, like with so many other things, the pandemic caused chaos in US population growth. In 2021, the population growth actually crashed to 0.1%. If this trend continues, it won't take long before the total population of the United States starts to decline. It's probable that this will further exacerbate the already decreasing populations in US cities, which could have detrimental effects on certain parts of the country. To be fair, it's not all doom and gloom for US cities. Many smaller cities are seeing an influx of residents, although it's pretty clear that even the thriving small cities tend to be concentrated in certain areas. Out of the 5 cities with the largest percentage growth in recent years, all of them are located in 2 states. In Arizona, Queen Creek and Buckeye are 2 small cities that are seeing an increase in movers, while in Texas, San Antonio, Leander, and New Braunfels are on the list. Then comes cities with the largest positive numerical changes. Here we see San Antonio, Texas, and Phoenix, Arizona, gaining over 13,000 residents in 2021. Fort Worth, Texas gained just under 13,000 new residents, and Port St. Lucie in Florida and North Las Vegas, Nevada each gained around 10,000 new residents. As you can see, even the cities that are growing in population are in the south. This leads to an inevitable conclusion. Both large and small cities in the north and along the coast seem to be in trouble. There are undoubtedly many smaller cities in these regions that are still seeing population growth, but none of them could claim the same gains as these small southern cities. Again, a lot of this has to do with the cost of living, job opportunities, and taxes. Some of it might have to do with the quality of life and the benefit of having more warm and sunny days throughout the year. In the coming decades, state and local governments will need to closely monitor the change in residential numbers in their cities and towns. If there aren't more incentives for people to stay in cities or to at least remain within major suburbs, it could lead to a serious population decline in many of the US's most important economic hubs. The future likely won't hold a Hollywood Boulevard devoid of people or a Times Square with nothing but flashing lights and windswept garbage passing through it. But if the current trends continue, major cities could run into a number of funding problems and a lack of skilled labor. Then again, perhaps the mass movements of Americans to the south will drive the cost of living up in this region, and we'll see a return to major cities in the northeast and west in the future. What it comes down to is that people will live wherever they can be happy while making enough money to live comfortably. Thanks for watching. Feel free to check out our other videos, such as why one of the USA's biggest lakes is reappearing centuries after disappearing. Or another one on the real reason the United States bought Alaska from Russia. Thanks for watching.